Good morning everyone and welcome to the third meeting of the Welfare Reform Committee in 2014. Could everyone please make sure that the mobile phones and electronic devices are switched off? Our first agenda item this morning is on taking a decision on whether to take item 3, which is consideration of specific aspects of our work programme in private. Members agreed? Agreed. Okay. And that brings us to agenda item 2. Which is a Your-Say session focusing on the experiences of those with or supporting individuals with long-term conditions and disabilities. We've held 3 Your-Say sessions to date, and they have proved an invaluable way for the committee to hear from people across Scotland on their views and personal experiences of the new welfare system. So I'd like very much to welcome today's witnesses who are here to speak about their experiences of that welfare system. They are Audrey Barnett, Donald Mackenzie, a Senior Mental Health Support Worker, Support in Mind Scotland, and Rosina McKeown. I'd now like to invite the witnesses to read their submissions to the committee, and following that, members will then ask questions so that we can get a greater understanding of the issues that you brought before us. So I think we've agreed the order, and Audrey's going to go first. I'll just pass over to you, Audrey. Thanks very much.
I worked for the DWP from 1992 until 2007, when it had become impossible for me to continue. My health had become too bad and I had to take long-term sick leave. Early in 2008, I was given medical retirement. I claimed incapacity benefit from when I went down to half pay in December 2007. In November 2012, I received forms to change from incapacity benefit to employment support allowance. Filling in the forms was quite difficult. I know how much I struggled with the forms, even with my working background, and it must be even more horrendous for people with little experience of the benefit system. The forms are only suitable for illnesses which are straightforward and consistent. They are not designed to deal with fluctuating conditions such as multiple sclerosis or systemic lupus erythematosus, both of which I suffer from. They took me a long time to fill in, especially as I had details of 12 health conditions to put in. It caused me a lot of stress trying to answer all the questions, and I felt it was very hard for me to give a full picture of what it's like to live with my health problems, due to the nature of the questions. They concentrate on certain areas, but not all health conditions fit into their boxes. One symptom that is caused by both MS and SLE is fatigue. This is also a common symptom in many autoimmune diseases, yet it is not taken into account anywhere on the claim. It is extremely disabling. You just can't keep going when it hits you. Trying just makes you more ill, and the fatigue gets even worse. Filling in the forms was exhausting as well as stressful. It is also very upsetting having to think how badly I am affected by my health conditions. I try to be a positive person, and having to focus on the negative was awful. I suffer from anxiety, and completing this form made it worse. I also suffer from benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, and this is brought in when I look down. Completing the form made the dizziness come on and took quite some time to pass. I did the form over a month to try to avoid this, but I had so much writing to do that it was still enough to set it off. As a result, I couldn't do much for a few weeks. My husband and Mum had to do even more for me. I couldn't go out and certainly couldn't drive. It is common knowledge that most people get put into the RAG group for ESSA, and this knowledge made filling in the forms even more stressful. I had a fair idea that it was going to be the start of a lot of stress. My ESSA forms contain details of all my medical conditions and my 8 different doctors and nurses. I explained about having to give up my job with the DWP and that I was awarded medical retirement. I also enclosed a letter from my GP stating that I have both MS and SLE, and that both are progressive, unpredictable, ongoing and incurable illnesses which I will never get better from. She stated that ongoing symptoms of fatigue, anxiety, muscular aches and weakness are symptoms that make it extremely difficult for a person to have any sort of regular employment. She invited the DWP and ATOS to contact her if they required any further information. They did not do this. In fact, they did not contact any of my medical professionals. In time, I received my decision letter from the DWP telling me I had been put in the RAG group. Enclosed with the letter was a leaflet, "What to do if you think your job seeker's allowance decision is wrong." I couldn't believe or understand it. How could I be classed as not fit for work now, but be expected to be fit within a year? It made no sense given the nature of my illnesses. Receiving this letter brought on a full-blown anxiety attack, something I hadn't had for some time, and they are horrid. I wasn't fit to do anything about it that day, but next day I phoned the DWP for an explanation. I eventually got through to them and was told somebody would phone me back either that afternoon or the next morning. They didn't. I phoned back a few days later and the same thing happened again. A few days later, while I was at the MS Therapy Centre for treatments, somebody from the DWP phoned 3 times. The third message she left was very stroppy, saying that I had asked for them to phone me back that day, but hadn't bothered to wait in. I phoned them again and managed to talk to somebody who said they would send me out an explanation of their decision. All they sent was a single page telling me I had been placed in the RAG group. I arranged to go and see the CAB. The lady was horrified at how I had been treated, and she took on my case. She suggested we put in for a reconsideration, which I agreed to, and she took it from there. I cried with relief to have her help me. She was very reassuring and made me much calmer. She contacted my MS nurse and got her to write a letter, which she included in the reconsideration. I was called into the job centre for a work-focused interview, but when I went in and explained my situation to the advisor, he said he would postpone any action until the result of my reconsideration came through. I waited and waited to hear from the DWP to see if the decision had been changed. I never did receive a notification letter. In May, I sent the DWP details of the rate of my occupational pension for this year, and they wrote to tell me what my ESSA rate would be with this adjustment. I noticed on the letter the words, "Because you are in the support group." I was so relieved to read this, but also frustrated that I had spent so long worrying when my mind could have been put at ease sooner. I had worked for as long as I possibly could. I was permanently exhausted and had no life outside work. I was very depressed and cried a lot. I kept working for longer than I should have, but I didn't want to be defeated. Being made to feel like a scrounger by having to virtually beg for benefits from a system I had paid into for many years is horrid. I certainly never chose to have health problems, but the way ATOS and the DWP deal with people now, you have to justify being ill. I fully understand that benefit tests have to be done, but if you get to the stage where a chronic, progressive illness has caused you to have to give up your career, then common sense should come into it, and you should be put in the support group and left alone. Stress has a detrimental effect on conditions such as MS, so why put people who are never going to get better through regular reassessments? Things for disabled people are only going to get worse when we are changed from DLA to PIP. A very high number of people are going to find themselves on less money than at present, and with the government estimating that 1 in 6 will lose their mobility cars, people are extremely worried. Many of the people who lose their cars will become housebound, leading to higher rates of depression and, sadly, more suicides. Other people will have their money reduced, preventing them from having treatments they depend on and getting help they require. It will also affect their entitlement to some other benefits and things like bus passes, blue badges, etc.
Well done, Audrey. Thanks very much. Donald?
I have supported several people who suffer severe mental health problems but scored 0 points in applying for ESA. In each case, they were supported by evidence from their GP, CPN and/or senior mental health support worker. In the first case to reach the appeal stage, the tribunal chairman awarded the benefit on the spot without me having to present the appeal on the basis that the appellant was likely to self-harm if found fit to work. The tribunal chairman seemed less than happy at the number of cases being rejected. The other cases have all qualified for ESA at appeal or tribunal stage. The impact of ESA has been devastating on the mental health of claimants who have been stressed and often traumatised by the process. made to feel like frauds for suffering poor mental health, disbelieved by the ATOS staff carrying out the assessments. I believe that many medical examiners have little experience of mental health issues, do not take into account any additional evidence from other mental health professionals, and do not seek supportive evidence from GPs, etc. Our service users are baffled and angry that they are subjected to this distressing and stressful process when they are clearly unfit to work. The process itself causes deterioration in mental health and leads to further depression and anxiety. On personal independence payments, I've assisted 5 service users in applying for PIP. The first was registered on the 11th of July 2013 and PIP awarded approximately 20th of December 2013, a delay of 5 months. The others were registered on the 26th of August, the 1st of October, the 2nd of October and the 20th of January 2014. None of these have yet been decided by ATOS or the DWP. These delays caused frustration and anxiety and suggest that the PIP decision system, which has only recently been introduced, is already in serious trouble. Hope this is of assistance. Please let me know if you wish any further information on these cases.
We'll probably get into some more information when we get a chance to ask you some questions. Rosina, do you want to give us yours?
I am a 54-year-old. I'm a polio survivor and I'm 54 years old. I'm unfortunately now suffering the late effects. Sorry. Suffering the effects of post-polio syndrome. This is also referred to as the late effects of polio. The Scottish Government has released a report on this. I was discharged from medical and orthopaedic care aged 15. I, like every other survivor, was told to get on with it and forget I ever had polio. This was not difficult for me as it was for others. I was rehabilitated and no longer used sticks or calipers. I've been fully employed since age 16, married in my 20s, worked part-time while the children were growing up. My last employer was Glasgow District Council, who, despite their efforts to assist me to stay in employment with access to work, changing my job description, etc., I found myself unable to sustain my job. The fatigue and muscle weakness had become incompatible, even with a job share position. The chance of early retirement became available and I applied. I felt this would be the best option rather than being possibly made redundant due to sickness absence. I first encountered the WCA in 2008 when I went to the Job Centre Plus. I was interviewed and they explained to me what would be required and that a letter would be sent in due course. The appointment came quickly and I didn't suffer any apprehension about the assessment. My GP and consultant I had been referred to agreed it was PPS. The doctor I saw at the first assessment was courteous and seemed to have an understanding of the problems which were developing. His report reflected this. He stated I had post-polio syndrome. I have a copy of this report should you wish to see it. From then I was put into the RAG group, receiving ESA to be reviewed in 12 months when my contributions had ended. My second WCA came 18 months later. I had a little apprehension when attending this assessment, mostly due to the information of other people who were being found fit for work. I was greeted at the assessment centre by a physiotherapist. When I did ask her when we were seated in the room if I should not be seeing a doctor, as I had a neurological condition. Her answer was that she was allocated my case. We'd only begun the questions she was asking when she stated she would have to stop the assessment as I was flagging up warnings with my answers and would need to see a doctor. I did get very upset at this point. I had no idea what her warning flags were and she didn't explain it to me. She left the room in search of a doctor who might be free. When she returned, she says I could either wait until the doctor was free or reschedule the appointment. I told her that I honestly didn't think I would be able to return given the stress and distress I was in now. I also stated that I didn't think I'd be able to sit in the waiting area given the stress and distress I was in. A doctor became free within a few minutes and I was taken to another room. His first questions to me were regarding epilepsy. This is something I've never suffered from. I had stated in my ASA 50 that fatigue, when especially bad, can cause problems with recall and that I find myself unable to do anything. This doctor, in my opinion, made no effort to hide his annoyance at being called to see me. He was very curt, to the point of rudeness. He was very dismissive of what I was telling him. He insisted that he wanted to see how I would retrieve something from the floor. This is extremely distressing, as I have a splint in my right leg and a knee brace. It's very awkward for me to get up and down, but I did this. This doctor actually laughed at me when he asked what I did if I found I couldn't push the hoover, and I told him I tended to pull it backwards. After the assessment, which lasted less than 15 minutes, I left in a very distressed state. I was informed by the DWP that I had been found fit for work. I informed them immediately that I would be appealing this decision and requested a copy of the medical report from Atos. To say I was shocked at what I read in this report is an understatement. It was as if I was reading about somebody else. At the end, he had stated I was suffering from back pain. As soon as I was able to, I reported this doctor to the GMC. His report had only a cursory mention of polio, no mention of new muscle wasting, fatigue, or the other symptoms he had been informed about. I have heard no more from the GMC, and I can only assume they are taking the complaint no further. I took the decision to a tribunal, and I had the decision overturned with the stipulation that I do not be reassessed for 24 months. My condition has deteriorated markedly since then. I now have to use a walking stick as the muscles in my right thigh have wasted so much that my balance is impaired. I was approached by my housing association in December 2012 as I had a 3-bedroom flat. They asked if I would be prepared to move to a smaller property. I was agreeable to this as I was on the first floor and would have been approaching them to find something on the ground floor with no stairs. Obviously, the bedroom tax was also a factor. I am in no position to pay out extra money. My housing association has been extremely helpful. They have a benefits advisor and try to help their tenants as much as possible. I filled out their application and kept my fingers crossed. My housing officer called in April. She said she had a property in mind, but there might be a delay of around 8 weeks. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, I did not actually get moved until September. I had no choice but to pay the bedroom tax, as if you have any arrears, you're not offered a move. This new tenancy is exactly what I need. The Housing Association have definitely done well. I could not have chosen better for myself. Unfortunately, it's taken so long that my son has now left home to a property of his own. The Housing Association were fully aware that he would be leaving Anon. Their benefits advisor has told me that I can apply to have the spare room for a carer to stay overnight, and it can be a family member. I do need help with shopping, changing bedding, etc. And of course, I'm unable to decorate, so my children are doing what they can at the weekends. I'm in the process of doing all this now. I expect to be reassessed for ESA in 2015. I will also be migrated to PIP at this time. I suspect as I have an indefinite award for DLA. With all the changes taking place and the 20-metre rule that has been introduced, I cannot be certain I will be awarded the enhanced rate, which would enable me to keep my mobility car, thus losing my independence. I failed to receive the discretionary housing payment when I applied in April, as I did not fit their criteria. I shall apply again, but I'm not confident that I will fit the criteria now. Given all of the above and taking into consideration the cost of energy, fuel and food, all rising, I feel that the future looks rather bleak.
Thanks very much, Rosina, for giving us that personal information. Thank you very much for that. And obviously, all of you, when we ask questions, if we're asking something that you don't feel comfortable answering, if you think it's too personal, you just don't want to give us the information we're looking for, just say so. Don't feel as though we're prying into your life. We're just trying to get an understanding of the circumstances.
We got upset because, although that was some time ago, it's still...
I can completely understand that, and if trying to answer any of our questions causes you to be upset again, feel free to say no, you just don't want to go there. You don't feel under any compulsion at all to give us information if you don't feel that you're capable of giving it, or even that you just want to give us it. But anything you can tell us would be very helpful. What you've given us so far has clearly been helpful, and I'll open up to members to ask questions around the information that you've given us. But if I start off, just to get a couple of things for clarification, Audrey, I wasn't quite sure. When you had your initial assessment, did you have, because you explained quite clearly how difficult it was to fill in the forms, how stressful that process was, did you have additional information provided by your GP at that point, which went along with the information you provided yourself?
Yes, my GP gave me a letter. I've actually got it here.
Did you feel that letter provided information which was relevant, was helpful, or was it too cursory to be of any assistance to you?
She explained that with the health problems, that holding down a job was virtually impossible, confirmed my illnesses, invited ATOS and the DWP to contact her for further information, and I don't even know if they read the letter. They didn't take anything into account that she said. Well,
it's certainly helpful for us to know that that was the detail that was provided, because one of the concerns we've had is that in too many cases, the only information that ATOS had initially came from the claimant themselves, and that there was no additional information provided by GP. So we just wanted to get that clarified.
Yeah, I put the letter in with the application.
Yeah. Donald, we visited the Decision Makers Centre in Bathgate, and we were given sight of a couple of claims to give us examples of how the process had undergone. And what struck us, I think Annabelle might confirm this, because I know she spent a lot of time questioning on this, although there was some detailed information on some of the physical aspects of the claimant's condition, in one specific case, a very major part of the claimant's difficulties surrounded mental health, depression and other aspects of mental health. And yet on the forum, that only came out to about one sentence from the assessor. Yeah. You said that in the 5 cases that you looked at, the information provided or taken into consideration was minimal. Is that just something that happens in all cases, or is it the majority of cases?
It varies from individual to individual, but with people suffering from mental health problems tend not to offload a lot of stuff onto forms, because they've spent several years trying to mask mental health problems because of stigma, because of just trying to survive. So unless they are specifically asked, do you self-harm? Have you tried to commit suicide? When were you last arrested or detained under the Mental Health Act? If these questions are not asked, that information will not be given generally by the claimant, because they don't want to think about that sort of thing. So when they're filling in these forms, that information doesn't come through, in my experience.
The other thing that we identified, we were taken to an ATOS assessment centre, and we were given a mock assessment to see how it would be undertaken. And again, they chose mental health as the issue. The doctor who carried out that mock assessment was a very senior person and clearly understood mental health issues. The actress who played the claimant had clearly been briefed on mental health issues. So in some circumstances you could see how a doctor who was on top of the issue could actually form a clear opinion. It certainly allowed us to form a clear opinion about whether that person would have been found fit for work. But in a matter of routine, given that some of the assessments are being carried out by physiotherapists or other people not necessarily trained in mental health, is that the concern that you have?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems we've got is that under the old system, income support and capacity benefit, part of my job as a support worker was to go along with people to the assessments at York Place. Because of the welfare reform, our workload has increased to such an extent that I no longer have the time or the resources to go along with people to assessments, so I don't see them. I tend to deal with helping them fill in the form and then help them with the appeal afterwards if the form isn't. When I'm doing it with the person, they will reveal that sort of information that will allow the ATOS DWP to make a more informed decision. However, my experience prior to not going along to the hearings, when I used to go along to the assessments, is that quite often it would be a physiotherapist, it would be a nurse, it might be a retired GP that was maybe didn't have a great deal of insight into mental health conditions. Therefore, again, they don't ask the correct questions. It's only maybe a very experienced GP or somebody who has specifically got experience in mental health issues who asks the correct questions that then results in the correct assessment. But I've no reason to suppose that under the ESA that it's changed much. There will still be people that don't really have experience in mental health who are making these assessments.
Rosina, just in relation to the information you gave us, you said that when the initial assessment had been done by a doctor, they were very courteous and understood your situation. When we spoke to ATOS, they told us that they would always try and get the best information, and therefore, when I heard you saying that the initial assessment the second time was done by someone not as trained as a doctor, but that person realised that they needed to get a doctor to come in. The doctor was the problem at that point. It wasn't so much that the assessment, the person who did the initial assessment was the problem, am I right? It became the problem that the doctor didn't seem particularly concerned or seemed annoyed at having to be called in to do the assessment.
Well, I can't speak for him, he just was rude.
Yeah.
And any time I was telling him it, I feel he wasn't listening. Pretty sure he didn't read the consultant's letter or GP letter that was with the ESA 50, because if he did, he would have been asking appropriate questions.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I was a bit distressed by that point, so I don't think he could have placated me no matter what he did, actually, to be perfectly honest.
No, he didn't have to admit that, but I mean, the problem seems to come down sometimes to just the individual, whether it's a doctor or not a doctor who's carrying out the assessment, whether they're empathetic or they're not.
Had the file been read, but post-polio syndrome is a neurological condition. I shouldn't have seen a physiotherapist. Yeah, and that's why she was asking questions. She also hadn't read the ESA 50, because it's saying in it, when the fatigue is there, you just sort of sit and vegetate in front of the telly for, say, 15 minutes. And if you'd asked me I don't know, what's your son's phone number? I mean, I would have to go and look at the book. It's not permanent. Yeah. It's just when you're so fatigued, you just can't.
Again, this is one of the issues that we've identified, that the assessment's carried out, and it's a sort of an instantaneous assessment. It's about that person at that time, and it takes no account of whether that person could actually carry out a full day's work or a full week's work.
If I could add, it's almost ipso facto, if somebody's well enough to attend the assessment, they'll be found fit to work. Because if they're not well enough to attend the assessment and they don't attend it, instead of that being taken as evidence of their illness, they just get given a new date for a new assessment, and that'll happen 2 or 3 times, and then they'll stop the benefit if they don't turn up. Regardless of the fact that their inability to turn up is caused by the medical condition. That's not taken into account anywhere in the process.
I think it's been said at this committee before by people, it's almost as if you're warm, you're working. That seems to what it boils down to. Jamie, do you want to ask some questions?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I've got a couple of questions arising out of Audrey's testimony and her written evidence as well. And Audrey, you told us that when you applied to change from incapacity benefit to ESA, that the forms weren't particularly suitable for your circumstances, you say, and your evidence, they concentrate in certain areas, but not all health conditions fit into their boxes. So I suppose the question is, what is it that they are asking that's wrong, or maybe more appropriately, what is it that they're not asking that they should be asking?
One of the main things that there's nowhere you can put in the form is the fatigue, and fatigue is a massive problem. It's really, really disabling. The boxes are kind of all about, can you lift this, can you push a button? They just don't take all different criteria into account. It's kind of, if you've got a straightforward illness that's there for a while, it's going to go away, a broken leg, that sort of thing, the form will cope with that. But if your condition fluctuates, it just doesn't work.
And obviously you mentioned fatigue. Are there other sort of criteria you think that they should be asking about specifically that would help them come to a more rounded assessment in terms of people's conditions?
Yeah, probably, but I can't off the top of my head come up with the answers. But yeah, the forms just don't allow you to give them the information how your condition affects you, because it's all rigid questions. It's hard to explain.
Okay. And you also mentioned you suffer from another condition, which I'm going to attempt pronouncing, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo.
EPPV.
That's what I should have said. And you mentioned that's obviously brought on when you looked down and completing the form, essentially exacerbated that condition. I'm not sure if another option of filling out the form would have been any better, but were you at least offered another option, another way of completing the form?
No, and after 2 weeks I had a letter saying, hurry up and get your form back, kind of thing.
Okay.
I think if I have to be, or when I have to be reassessed, I now know I will just go to the Citizens Advice and get them to do it for me. But I felt with my benefits background, I thought, why should I have to go to the CAB? I should be able to do this. But I just couldn't.
The letter that you were sent telling you hurry up, did it say if you're having any problems filling this out, contact us?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Okay. So there wasn't trying to facilitate that in any way.
No.
And I thought it was also interesting. You mentioned that even when you got good news in terms of you were eventually placed in the support group after being placed in the RAG group before. But they didn't actually tell you about this, except for in another letter sometime later. This was never communicated to you.
That's right. I've never ever had a letter from them telling them that I won my case and have been moved into the support group. Mm-hmm. It was just reading through the letter to do with how my occupational pension affected my ESSA for last year. Mm-hmm. Just reading through it, because I'm in the support. I'm in the support group. I thought, brilliant.
Some people might even miss that, so they might even technically have been informed by virtue of another letter. There could be people out there that just never know.
Yeah.
Okay. And Rosina, if I could turn to you, that was really interesting. You talked about how your housing association had been very helpful, and you obviously mentioned the benefits advisor and the assistance, although it took longer than was ideal in moving to a new home. But one of the issues we're interested in is how organisations like housing associations, local authorities can help support individuals. So I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about, you say they were extremely helpful, so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and tell us what they did that was good. Maybe other housing associations, other institutions can learn from it.
It's a bit, having a benefits advisor there is, getting an appointment's a problem. It's very busy, but they are really, I think there really should be one or two full-time, I wouldn't even say part-time, in housing associations and anywhere where people need help with forums or applications. I mean, the application for the new house had to be about, I don't know how many pages long. It was just massive. I mean, I've got problems writing as well, not to the same extent, but I mean, it took me 3 days to know the ESA forum, because you have to stop and you can't just say, right, everything's fine now, and go and sit down. Actually, you're just done for the day. But having somebody there that can go through it. I mean, they even offer to write it for you. It's your words. That's what everywhere needs.
Quite proactive at letting
Yeah, it's
tenants
the
like
first
yourself
thing
know
they
about
tell
it.
you, when they go in, and there's, we have a benefits officer on site. But it'd be better if it wasn't 3 rotating, so you're seeing the same person, you're not having to repeat everything. But I think everywhere, every housing association, anybody that's dealing with social housing or people should have one. I had to go to Glasgow city centre for citizen advice because my local one, you queue at the door and it's a first come, first served basis. I can't stand at that door and queue. So they were the only ones that were able to offer me an appointment. So, they're just shutting these places left, right and centre, and people are just struggling, really,
Evan.
Thank you, Convener. If I could ask Rosina first, you, in your evidence, in your written submission, you've quite clearly stated that you worked for as long as you possibly could, and that your employer did everything possible to try and ensure that you kept that job. Could you explain a little bit about the end of that situation?
With the employer?
Yeah.
My job was based. They were doing as best they could. I couldn't take minutes because you can never tell how long a meeting's going to last. Couldn't really cover the reception. I worked with social work and the admin, and so couldn't really cover reception because you're up and down all the time and walking. But they were really understanding when I did tell them that it was, I just can't sustain it. I was working 2.5 days a week and sleeping for 1.5 at the end of it. It's just didn't seem it's not right, it's not life.
So you did everything that you possibly could to maintain that job,
well,
and your
I feel
employer
actually
did
could have
too.
maybe stopped a bit sooner, might have helped but it was just I think I kind of came to a dead stop, and it was like I just can't do it now, But I've never had a problem. The Glasgow City Council were fine, and chairs and footrests and anything that I needed I got. I never had a problem until I stopped work, and then I was get things thrown at me I'd never heard of, so.
And obviously, while you were working, you were thinking that you've paid into the system, just in case anything did happen and that safety net was there. What do you think about the situation now, having paid into a system and finding that it's not there for you at the moment?
Angry, I would say, because it reflects back again. The DWP never quite happy to go along my diagnosis until my contributions ran out, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can get this one back to work now. Or that felt like the attitude. Not that, I don't know. Having never been in the benefit system, I didn't understand it. And I was like, well, okay, if it only lasts 12 months, it only lasts 12 months. But I didn't expect that the assessment would be... The first assessment stated PPS, which isn't going in. If they've got a cure, I'd like to hear about it. It's not going anywhere, but then it disappears, and it's not there anymore, and I'm fit for work. And I'm like, well, that's two polar opposites. You just can't have two. It's either there or it's not there. It can't be there and then disappear. So that's where the anger comes in.
And quite understandably so, I think. Audrey, obviously you're in a similar position to Rosina, where you worked as long as you possibly could. Ironically, for the DWP, the people you're now battling with. Again, did you do everything you think that you could to stay and work for as long as you possibly could?
Yes, I tried everything I could. I reduced my hours. I tried to explain to the employer what my needs were, and the majority of the time the jobs were suitable for me, but I was just permanently exhausted and in pain. I had started in the office in 1992 as an admin assistant. For a while I went up to an admin officer, but when I got diagnosed with MS, I asked to go back down to an admin assistant. I just felt less stress was required. But I then got given temporary promotion, and for most of my career there I was on temporary promotion. I didn't want a permanent promotion because I wanted to be able to step back down if I needed to. But I was really struggling. I was permanently exhausted. I had no life outside of the office. I would wake up in the morning, I would be in absolute tears. I'd arrive at work exhausted and in tears and try to do a day's work. I'd come home from work, I would just have to lie down. There was just no life at all. And things changed in the office. We became a social fund centre, and I went back down to my substantive grade of admin assistant. But all the jobs were physical, and by this time I was having a lot of joint pain. But I hadn't had a diagnosis on the joint pain, so they weren't really listening to me. And I felt my only option then was to go for permanent promotion so that I was away from filing repetitive jobs like that. So I got my permanent promotion and got put onto a social fund telephone section, which again was too much. It was way too much for me, this constant phone call with minimal training. And I spoke to management, spoke to the union. I got taken off the phone section for about a week, but the manager wasn't there at that point. The following week the manager came back and I found myself back on the phone section, and I kept telling them this is too much, but they didn't care, and I ended up having an MS relapse. During this time I was also having investigations about the joint pain, so when I went to my GP with my MS relapse, they also told me, oh, we've now discovered you've got lupus as well. And at that point I just realised, no, I can't keep doing this.
And again, like I asked Rosina, obviously you paid tax and national insurance, and what do you feel about the fact that, you know, that safety net is being taken away from folks who have paid into the system, expecting that if anything happened to them, that they'd be looked after?
I feel really let down. It's just not fair. I've spent years, on the other side working for DWP, and now I need them, and I'm having to fight for everything. I just feel let down, and I feel like they're treating me like a scrounger. And I promise I didn't choose to have all these health conditions, but I feel like they think I did. It's mad.
Thank you. And Donald, I think, like my colleagues around the table and most of my colleagues here in Parliament, we are getting a huge number of cases of folk coming to us who are having major difficulties, many of whom who have mental health problems. And like Audrey and Rosina, a lot of these folks have worked as long as they possibly could until illness struck. Are you finding that a lot of the cases that you have dealt with are folks who have held down jobs, in some cases maybe for too long, which has exacerbated their illness, because they feel that that's what they should do?
I think in my experience, the people I work with tend to be 50-50. There's people with long-term conditions that have never worked and never will work. Maybe they've got mental health issues as well as learning difficulties. So they're already in the non-working population. But I am seeing more people now who, as employment situations tighten, they're the ones that tend to get rid of first, and the big employers that are looking to lose some of their dead wood, as it might be described, they're the ones that are now suddenly cast adrift. And maybe one day they've been talking about following the media's representation of these Dole Q Scrounge and Benefit Street layabouts, and suddenly they're finding themselves being treated in exactly that way. And that in itself is devastating, regardless of the initial diagnosis or the initial problem they've got. The actual stigma of then losing your job and then getting thrown into this system is it causes huge problems. I mean, I don't know if there's any follow-up done, but I know that there's been several deaths of people who have committed suicide or just given up, overdosed, maybe not deliberately, but just trying to escape stigma and escape the hardship that they're going through. And I would love to see if there was anybody who was actually following that up, to see how many people have died following, specifically following their experience of the benefit system, because I think it must be substantial.
Audrey and yourself have mentioned the word scroungers, which is certainly a word I would never use, but it's one that's being used quite often by a number of politicians and by the mainstream media in particular. What do you think of this attitude that there seems to be, which seems to be again the welfare state, which provided that safety net that we all hoped that we didn't need, but it was there in case we did?
Yeah, I think it's appalling. I mean, the most recent furore surrounds Benefit Street on Channel 4, where, you know, I haven't watched it. I watched the first episode for 10 minutes, I think, and then switched off.
Donald.
You know, you're talking about hundreds of people on one street. They focus on 3 or 4 of the worst examples, and then that is taken by the media, and I've got to say by many politicians as well, as being the standard, and that is the way things are in the benefit system. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I find it appalling that people that are meant to represent the electorate, the population, allow the media to go, and actually encourage the media to go down that road. So unless you're part of the hard-working families, which is now what they're all using, Labour and Tories both use this hard-working families idea, that everybody else is irrelevant. We don't count unless you're part of a hard-working family. And if you're not working, or you're not in a family, then that's it, you're on the scrap heap.
Thank you. Obviously, Convener, we've heard today from 2 folks who were obviously hard-working, who worked till the last possible minute that they possibly could. I thank you very much for your evidence today, folks. Thank you, Convener.
Ken, and then Linda.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just ask, also thank you very much for your evidence, very powerful, persuasive evidence. Can I ask both Audrey and Rosina, the process you've described is clearly very stressful, very difficult indeed. Can I just ask, at the end of it, have you financially lost out? Are you financially worse off than you were at the beginning from, have your benefit payments dropped? In the end, you've held on. It's been a fight, but you've held on to your benefit levels.
Held on to it so far, but I have no confidence for the future.
It's going to be reviewed again in a few months.
Yeah, well, I've never had a decision letter, so some point within the next year I'll be reviewed. But I just have no confidence. I'm absolutely dreading it. And I know it's just going to set the anxiety off again.
Indeed. And Rosina?
I just went from working to the benefit and just trimmed down.
So it was reduced over the period. And well, you've had a...
During when they found me fit for work, until the tribunal, I was on the assessment rate. So that dropped. They gave me it back.
Right,
but it doesn't help me in the immediate time.
Yep. And particularly on the bedroom tax, I was trying to work out what happened there. You paid the bedroom tax. Yes, you had a family.
So it was a family home, and 2 of them left, and it was just me and my son, which is fine. And then I knew about the bedroom tax, but my priority at that time was not falling down the stairs when I went out. So I never it was here. And then it was just before last Christmas. I thought I'm just going to have to apply and see what they've got on ground floor level. But that didn't happen until the January. And then I had the time delay. It was an old gent that was in the house, and then he died, and then it took a lot of time for the family to sort. So meantime, I was paying the bedroom tax, but obviously my son was there. He's not going to let me starve or whatever needed cut back on. I was worried about when he left, when I'd moved. I'm in the middle rate care with the DLA, so that's fine. They've said now you can have that room. With PIP rules changing, I'm not at all confident that I'll have that whenever it happens.
Forced to move again.
So it will affect me then. It just seems to... It's like perfect storm forming there, do you know?
You applied for a discretionary housing payment and that was refused. Do you know why it was refused?
I didn't ask. I'm a bit like that, you know, if you say no, then right, fair enough. I am assuming it's because my son was in the house.
And have you thought about appealing it at all?
The benefits girl had said if it comes back, and then she wrote me again and I phoned her and I says, look, I'm just going to leave it. I've got to focus then on the moving part of it, because that's like a 3-bedroom house. It's going to have to get squished to 2, and it takes me, you have no idea, I was packing for like 6 months because I can only do so much. And then go and have a lie down, and so other things overtook it, so no, I didn't appeal. It's quite possible I would have got it, but I never pursued it.
And is it, if it wasn't for C, I mean, is it CAB who've been advising you throughout this? I'm just trying to work out.
They've been absolutely fantastic. My first point, see, I've never had a problem. Nobody's let me down. Yeah. And, you know, the like benefits advisor or CAB, when I first went and I was explaining everything to her, and she helped me with the forum. She wasn't at the trained, she was a volunteer, but she wasn't fully trained, so she says, I'll let you pass it on to somebody else. I said, that was fine. I mean, in between 2 appointments, but the woman that I had seen actually spoke to a GP retired friend of hers, and he explained it to her and how serious it is and will get in the future. So she informed the benefits advisor that would come to the appeal, but unfortunately she got double booked that day, so she wasn't. That was one letdown. She wasn't at the tribunal, but the initial woman came for support because she couldn't say anything, but she was there to let us know that, you know, it wasn't no deliberate or anything like that. It was just one of the bad coincidences.
But even with that support, it's still extremely stressful.
I have never experienced anything like that. I must say that over the past, it's about 2006, I don't have a lot of control over stress, and once stress is in, it just keeps going and going, and it'll top, and then that's me. Everything's gone then, the fatigue setting in, the pain setting in, and I actually sort of just curl into the pain, and that can take 2 days. I was 2 days before I could even complain about that doctor as strongly as I felt at the time. I could not physically get up and, well, I typed it, I didn't write it. I couldn't even do it. It was devastating. Doesn't cover it. I just wish there was another word. And it's ridiculous that anybody with a long-term condition, which I didn't consider I had, by the way. I was told to forget about it, and I did. So this is coming back to me now, 40 years down the line. I'm having to deal with bits suddenly deciding they don't want to work anymore. So while I'm dealing with that, I have to justify myself to a doctor who's not listening. So it's very hard.
And Donald, can I just ask one question? The cases that you've been taking to appeal, are they new cases or are they all existing?
They're a mixture, 50-50, of people who have been on long-term income support and capacity benefit, and more recently people who are coming out of work or becoming too ill to work. So they're either... What I've discovered now recently is that more employers are asking people to resign rather than sack them. I don't know why that is, perhaps because they feel that they can't sack people with medical problems or give them medical retirement, so they say, you're not well enough to work, we're stopping your sick pay, it'd be better if you resign. And then, of course, somebody who resigns then can't get job seekers allowance, so ESA is almost becoming a default situation for people who otherwise may have been able to be assisted in employment. So there is a mix of people with long-term conditions and people who are coming out of work and going on to benefits.
And in terms of the delays that you're experiencing in these appeals, is there are people with existing claims likely to be dealt more timorously than those with new claims, or neither?
The delays that I'm talking about in my evidence relate largely to personal independence payment. So everybody on personal independence payment that I have represented has huge delays. Only one of them has actually come to a decision. On ESA, I'm not sure that if there's a big difference between people who have been on ESA or on benefit for a while and people who are going on to benefits from having been in work. I don't really know whether or not there's a delay there.
Thanks so much.
Linda.
Thanks. I think most of what I was going to ask has been covered, but just for a bit of clarification, Rosina, can I ask, when you saw that doctor, the one that didn't listen to you, and you got this ridiculous letter back that talked about back pain and stuff, I know you said you complained to the GMC, once you felt able to. I just wondered if you got back in touch with the assessment centre or anything. You didn't? No. So you just moved on from that. It's perfectly understandable. Mm-hmm. And it takes me on to Audrey as well. You're now in the support group, but you're worried about what happens when they want to reassess you. Yeah. And it's the thing about long-term conditions, and Donald had talked about people with learning difficulties, people who have never worked, who are having to go through this as well, and we do all see folk like that. I mean, I have some adults with learning difficulties that I deal with quite regularly, and the constituency are hugely distressed at the idea of their money being stopped and things. And I just wonder, maybe Donald's best for this one, do you pick up anything as a professional that says, OK, this awful system is still fairly new? Do you think there is any credence being taken at all of the fact that there are long-term conditions that are not going to overnight be sorted, that there are people who have perhaps never worked for very, very valid reasons? Do you get any feeling at all that any of this is taken on board with potential discretion used further down the line or changes to the system?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of the people that I work with have maybe had bipolar affective disorder, which used to be manic depression. They'll also maybe, or other people will have paranoid schizophrenia. They have had these conditions for 25, 30 years, a lot of them. And now they're having to be assessed every year or every 2 years. Now, sometimes they're going to 2 years, I think, because the system can't cope with annual reassessments. I had one case where somebody had gone to tribunal. They'd won the tribunal. They were awarded ESA for a year. It was a year from the original assessment date, which was up 1 month after the tribunal. So they'd only just got their back money and they were sent a new questionnaire saying you got it for a year. And that person went ballistic, and it surprised me that they didn't go straight round to York Place and, kick the windows in, because they were just so distressed, so angry, so upset. And I was as well. I thought, we've just gone through all this stuff at the tribunal. We've awarded them ESA. And then a few weeks later, well, a month later, they then get the forms to start all over again. And you can imagine the despair and the anger that this person goes through. Like, if you've had a condition, I think it's particularly appalling for these ladies who've got long-term conditions, but who've been expected to jump through these hoops every year. You said 2 years, I think you got it, Rosina. 2 years, what's going to happen in 2 years? It's ludicrous, the resources that are being wasted, medical resources, administrative resources, putting them through it every couple of years when there's obviously no prospect of recovery.
Aye, because it strikes me, convener, when Donald, when you said there about resources and stuff, that even if you get your head round the idea that those in charge don't actually care about the individuals, and you accept that, and get your head round the idea that they want to, in their words, cut down, the costs of welfare, actually they're in this perpetuating circle that is not cutting down any of these costs at all. No. And if there's a bit more humanity and a bit more discretion shown around things, a better system may be achieved and have long-term cost cuts.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that I'm not sure where it all started. Perhaps it's simply that governments have long not trusted benefits claimants. So the medical profession is not trusted to make a judgment on whether you can work or whether you can't work. So then that is sent to DWP, who employs people to administer and then make an assessment. They're not trusted to make that decision, so we bring in ATOS, who are then employing somebody to administer, to make an assessment, who doesn't make the decision but sends it back to DWP, who then make a decision that can't be challenged directly because it's ATOS that have carried out the assessment to make the decision. When you've got a GP, you've got a specialist, you've got a lot of medical professionals who are involved in the care for both these ladies and the people I work with, who are perfectly legitimately qualified to make the decision on whether or not they're fit to work. So, you know, I don't understand why we have to spend millions and millions and millions of pounds going through this process.
And then finally, Convener, we've heard again from Rosina, a tribunal where the original decision has been overturned. And we hear this over and over and over again. Again, Donald, from your point of view, do you get any feedback at all or any feeling that this has been taken on board and that there may well be changes?
Not really, because I don't get any further than the gatekeepers in the DWP and ATOS. When I am at tribunals, I mean, the very first case of ESA, the tribunal chairman himself, I think was just so dispirited at the number of cases he was having to look at, which, from his perspective, appeared to be no-brainers. You know, he just spoke to me outside the tribunal and said, listen, is this person going to self-harm? I said, they're already self-harming. I said, right, we'll grant that. We'll not bother going through the tribunal process. And that seemed to be something that he was trying to short-circuit the process because there were so many cases at tribunal that this particular chairman was trying to move the process through. So at that level, an external independent level, it may be that people are recognising that the system isn't working, but within the system itself, you don't actually get to find that out.
You want to say something, or you were looking ready to go there?
At the end of last year, I had a meeting with Danny Alexander. He's our MP for our area, in relation to a variety of things that affect those of us with MS. And obviously one was benefits. And he contacted Ian Duncan-Smith, who sent me back a 6-page letter waffling on, and from this letter it looks like there are no intentions of changing anything. He's justifying what they're doing. People with illnesses like MS, we have to regularly review because there are new treatments come on, and well, if there's a new treatment that'll cure me, can I have it, please? So, and the same for Rosina. There's no treatment for Rosina, but that's how they're justifying it, and they're basically saying this is going to continue. We will be reviewed. No sign of change.
If I could add that I've contributed to something like 4 separate research projects. One by Professor Harrington, I think it was, who was looking at the initial thing about ESA. One that was being carried out by the University of Stirling, and 2 that are individual PhD projects, one from the University of Edinburgh, I think the other one was Glasgow University, where there are people looking at the benefit system and how it works, but while they tinker about with the ESA form, and I've noticed that over a few years, that the wording slightly changes, the pages are slightly different. Because I've got to the situation now when people are reviewing it, I just dig out the copy of the last form, fill it in for them and say sign there, because that's the one that got them the award, so that they don't have to go through this draining process of answering all these questions again. I say, are you feeling better or worse than last year? Much the same. Okay, I'll just copy exactly what I wrote last time, change a date, sign it here and send it off. And then you notice that some of the wording's slightly different. Some of the expressions in the form are slightly different. But I don't think any of it's different enough to make a substantial difference to the process.
Tinkering with the edges, yeah. And just my final comment, which I suspect you'll agree with Audrey and Rosina, both of you would far rather be well and working. And Donald, I would expect that most of your clients would be the same.
Most of my clients would be delighted to work, but they're prevented from working, of course, because if they carry out any sort of work at all, volunteering or whatever, they then have to go to their GP to say that it's permitted work, and then that makes a problem. Yeah. So they maybe want to volunteer somewhere at a charity shop, but then say, but if the DWP discover that I'm volunteering at a charity shop, will they not find me fit to work? And I said, not necessarily, but everyone's aware of cases where people get dobbed in by their neighbours for having been seen to go to work when they're in receipt of benefits, and that whole stigma again of benefits grounders working on the side impacts on people who are genuinely trying to do something, even just working in the corner charity shop. They're dissuaded from doing so because the system says you can only do permitted work, which is notified to DWP, it's signed off on by your GP, all this sort of thing. So it actually works against people returning to work.
Thank you.
Annabelle.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to all of you, and thank you very much indeed for coming along, and hopefully you'll feel after the experience that it wasn't as bad as going to the dentist. Hopefully we're not that intimidating. I wanted to ask firstly, Rosina, again, that many of the general points have been well aired, but just to pick up on a few points. So you had, understandably, in my view, reported the doctor that you had the experience with at Atos to the General Medical Council, and you say that you had heard nothing further from them. Did you receive an acknowledgement of your complaint?
Yeah, that goes through, but they've got a double kind of parallel thing that goes, and one of them kind of goes no further action, and I would only have heard anything back if they were taking further action from it. So I took the silence as, well, it got to a certain point. I think they did say, mind you, it would be on record. Don't know whether they meant their records or his.
So did they communicate with you to clarify what they had done and why they had done it, or was there just a sort of silence and you were to infer from that something?
It's pretty kind of
opaque.
This is what we do,
right.
And you follow the boxes down. So it's a case of, you know, follow that one down. If they're not taking it any further, it's sort of. But this will be on record. Didn't they say whose record? But the second trail that you went down was if they thought there was any justification in going forward, they would contact me again. I mean, they gave me forums for victim support and everything. I mean, they were really quite helpful, do you know, but yeah, I just didn't find anything out.
Right.
Also didn't pursue that, mind you.
Okay. But I mean, obviously, I mean, whatever forms they sent relating to other matters, it perhaps would have been quite helpful for them to have actually said what decision they'd taken and why they'd taken it. Would have probably been quite useful for you in terms of the experience, fairly horrible experience you had had with a doctor who's currently still presumably registered as a doctor to practice, even though he laughed at you, which doesn't seem to me to be very much in keeping with the Hippocratic Oath, apart from anything else. In terms of the appeal that you had to take to the tribunal, can you clarify, because I just wasn't sure, was there any additional evidence available at the tribunal, or was it basically your case, your appeal, based on all the information that had already been presented?
The only extra thing that I put in, because Atos, with the ESA, before tribunals or anything, received a file like this from me, with all the information, letter from my GP, the consultant, the Scottish report, do you know. The only additional thing I put in was the printed out version of the NHS England's map of medicine, because it's the only thing that I could find that I hadn't already added.
Could you clarify what that document is?
It's we're here complaining about tick boxes, and this is a tick box. It's sort of like a map. You put in post-polio syndrome. We don't have one in Scotland. It's NHS England, and then it will go down to, is it diagnosed or undiagnosed, and then you follow it down, and each box opens up. It tells you the symptoms, preferable treatment, you know, things like that. We don't have the same in ours, but the report.
But in terms of the hard medical information, it was the same as had been presented.
They only had
initially
to click into NHS, press post-polio syndrome, and they would Google, put it in Google, and you can find it.
Okay, but in terms of the actual hard medical evidence from the medical practitioners, that had already been supplied. And I guess, therefore, the feeling is, if that had been perhaps even read at stage 1, perhaps stage 2 would not have been necessary.
I think at the tribunal, mind you, it had been read because there was those wee strip post-it notes on different parts.
So, no, I'm saying that at the tribunal, the fact that you had to go to tribunal to appeal seems to be not unrelated to the fact that this medical information, medical evidence, which was available at the very outset, was not properly assimilated by those concerned.
The tribunal also managed to find not the doctor I was saying, that I see, my consultant, another consultant who specialises in PPS, but apparently the DWP can't find one.
Okay, well, that's been helpful to receive that clarification. Thank you for that, Rosina. And turning to Audrey, I note that you had said in your evidence today that you fully recognise that benefit tests are required to be done, but you feel that with respect to, in particular, chronic progressive illnesses, common sense should prevail. Can I ask then for you to clarify what you would, what in practice you would hope that would result in if we were to take common sense as being a key factor in this whole process, which clearly it seems to be lacking across the board. But what would you, Audrey, feel that would be
basically,
encapsulated?
if someone has a long-term, well, permanent, chronic progressive condition that is just not going to get any better and they've reached the stage where they can no longer work, to me it's just common sense. They're not going to work again, so put us in the support group and just leave us alone. We don't need all this extra stress and anxiety. We've got enough to cope with.
You had also mentioned that you did not receive a specific decision letter in terms of the apparent movement from RAG to the support group. I'm just mentioning this, that you may feel it useful nonetheless to get that from the DWP in terms of being ready for the next stage. That might be something that it would be useful to have, is that piece of paper for anything that may come further down the line.
I thought about doing it, it's just the thought of
contacting
contacting them, it's like, oh no.
But I mean, you could maybe
feels
right now on the basis that you
dread.
might get a reply within 6 months. You never know if you're doing well. The DWP are true to form. Now, Donald, on the issue of mental health, and the convener alluded to this at the outset, we did indeed have a very detailed meeting with assessors, DWP in Bathgate. And it was a very helpful meeting, but one of the issues that arose was that on this very long assessment form, the attention to mental health issues seemed to be almost negligible. And indeed, I recall one question which was supposed to deal with mental health issues, which was basically, by the demeanour of the individual applicant, can you make the following judgment? And I thought that was rather bizarre in the 21st century. With medical knowledge being what it is, it was rather medieval, I would have thought, an approach that you were to look at somebody and decide if they had, some mental health problem. But you mentioned that as far as your experience with tribunals is concerned, that you've had some helpful discussions even before the tribunal process starts. But I just wonder, in terms of cases that have gone to tribunal, to what extent then, for cases where the initial ATOS negative decision is overturned, to what extent is there an exploration of evidence on mental health? I mean,
exploration or explanation?
Exploration by the tribunal.
Right.
I mean, how does that all pan out if there's a tribunal that actually takes place, that there's an appeal against an initial negative decision of ATOS on mental health grounds? How does that work to the point that then there would be sufficient information that would result in the tribunal overturning the ATOS initial decision?
The tribunals I've attended, what I've tended to do prior to the tribunal is to get a letter from a GP, a letter from a specialist, a letter from a CPN, and then I write myself as senior mental health support worker, all confirming that this person is unable to work. None of the tribunals that I've been to have lasted more than 10 minutes. One was over before it started, the others tend to last 10 minutes because I've collected evidence. Given it. What they then do, I don't know, but there hasn't been any doubt in any of the tribunals that I've attended, certainly, about the initial decision being wrong, and it's been overturned very, very, very quickly. And I've got to say, unfortunately, it's mostly around this issue of self-harm or people who have attempted suicide in the past, because if that isn't explicitly mentioned in the original ESA 50 form, it doesn't get taken into account, whereas the tribunal chairmen now, or chairpeople now, are more geared up for it, and if there's the slightest element of self-harm or suicide, then what I think they tend to do is say you get this under Rule 22.2b or whatever it is, granted, you know, that your claim is granted. And to what extent anything further than that happens by the tribunal, I don't know. I've been very lucky. I've just won them all very simply and easily.
In terms of the initial application stage, to what extent have you been involved then in helping the applicant have this information available at the very outset? Is that something that is happening more often now, given we know that the ATOS assessment form itself is not geared up at all to, in my view, to mental health issues?
The position I'm in is that I'm working with people now who have went through the ESA form a couple of years ago when it first came in. People who have been using our service for 2 or 3 years, they're much more simple because I know where we're at. I tell people, don't fill in any forms on your own, come to me for help. I then see people who only come to our service because they've gone through the process and been given 0 points. So then I can sit down with them, go through it and then explain the point system. People who are doing a claim for the first time, what I do is before we fill the form in, I photocopy the point system, give them it and say, go away and spend a couple of days looking at this point system and see if you think that you fit into any of these categories. And by the way, this is the number of points you have to reach. You have to get 15 points. And then I'll go through it with them and say, do you experience this? Do you experience that? Again, the one that is... It used to be very, very difficult to speak to people about, but have you had any attempts at self-harm? Have you had any suicide attempts? Have you been arrested or detained under the Mental Health Act over the last year or so? I used to find it really difficult to ask these questions, whereas now, you know, it's routine, and it's become routine, it's become blasé, which I don't like about myself as a mental health support worker. My job should be about helping people to feel better about themselves, to help improve their mental health. And in reality, most of my work is on benefits, where I have to talk people down and dig into the dark corners to get that stuff out. Because as soon as you've got if you've got a recent suicide attempt, that's 15 points, you've got your ESA.
So these specific questions, you had mentioned that you had already given input into various reports and inquiries. Would that have included the suggestion that there be more specific questions geared to people's mental health history on the original form?
I don't think that I have made that suggestion because I'm not comfortable with the whole process itself, so I don't want people to have to go through the process. What I want the government, the DWP, to do is to look at the information that is given by the people who provide professional care for the claimants, the doctors, the specialists, the CPNs. These are the ones who are most able to make the correct decision on behalf of benefits claimants, not assessors and DWP decision makers who have nothing in front of them except what is written down on forms that may or may not reflect reality. It's the people who see the claimants on a regular basis who should be making these decisions.
And do you think, in terms of the general process, that it is appropriate then for somebody with no mental health background at all to be the one making the initial assessment?
No, they shouldn't, especially not if they're getting paid on results. The more people that get kicked off benefits, the more money ATOS gets, as I understand it. Maybe I'm just cynical, but...
Could I ask just one last general question, Convener, and to all three of you, and if you wish to answer, you don't wish to answer, or give your comments, it's entirely up to you, but I was just noting that the UK Welfare Secretary, Duncan Smith, in a recent speech on the 23rd, well, reported in the 23rd of January of this year, had apparently compared his welfare reforms to the struggle to end slavery. And he apparently said that changes to the benefit system are part of, and I quote, a historic mission, unquote, to help people, quote, break free, quote, unquote, like William Wilberforce's campaign to end the slave trade. Do any of you have any comments that you would wish to make on what he said?
I think the fact the government was taken to court recently over their welfare reforms encouraging slavery by forcing people on benefits to work for nothing for private companies says it all about Ian Duncan Smith, really, who I understand gets paid £1 million a year and out the public purse for his wife's farm. I understand. I think that's correct. He's the biggest benefit recipient in the country.
Anybody
Sorry,
else? Any,
I'm getting more and more
obviously,
angry.
someone else has set the scene, but if you've got any other comments that are of a different nature, or perhaps not quite in the same vein, but it's just interesting because you are people that he's saying that he's setting you free, and I just wonder if you feel very free.
It would be nice if our health would let us be set free, but it's not going to happen. I would love cures, as I've said before. I would love my illnesses to be cured, have my life back, and not depend on benefits. But until my health sets me free, then Ian Duncan Smith certainly can't.
It's unprintable.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming along. It's been very useful for us. Thank you.
It has indeed. Thanks very much to you all for your contributions today. And obviously, if there's anything else you want to give us information about, if you get home and think, well, I wish I had said that, feel free to give us more information if you think it'll be useful. Again, we've had your say sessions in the past, and they've all been very informative and have helped us to take things forward, asking pertinent questions based on the information that you've given us, and today has been no different. And I'm suggesting to the committee that the clerks will go over what we've heard this morning, pull together some information, ask pertinent questions of the Department of Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan Smith, so that we can get answers to these. Because one of the reasons why we had this group this morning was because in previous sessions we've had concerns raised about the inability of the work capability assessment to take into account degenerative conditions or long-term conditions. Atos told us on our visit that they had raised, along with others, concerns that people who were undergoing treatment for cancer, there was nowhere in the system that would take account of that, and the DWP responded to that because it had been the issue had been raised. So I think raising these issues and asking for an explanation as to why people with degenerative diseases or long-term conditions are being assessed and reassessed when there's no medical interventions creating improvement, which would lead someone to believe that having gone from a position where they were unfit for work, they become fit for work. As someone said, there are more miracles taking place in Atos assessment centres than happen at Lourdes. People are going in incapable of working but come out capable of working, and yet their condition has not improved. So we have to get answers to these types of questions, and the information you've given us today backs up the information we've had before, but also gives us the opportunity to ask those relevant questions. And that's that. If the committee agrees, we'll get a letter to that effect sent off. But thanks very much to the three of you for coming. I hope it wasn't too arduous, but you've certainly helped our committee this morning. I thank you very much for coming along and giving us the information that you have. Okay, thank you. And we have to get into private session now, so I'll suspend the meeting for a few minutes till we get ready for our next item.